I'll tell you, like, I went through kind of a 9-month sage brain training where every 3 hours I had to do these 2-minute exercises every single day. And much like working out your body, I was working out my brain. And lo and behold, it works. Like, I am the multitasker of all. My attention, like, my mom is great. She'll like walk me through directions on, I don't know, heaven forbid having to read a manual to like build something. And I just gloss over. And so it wasn't too long ago where she was like walking through some instructions with me and she's like, "You're still with me?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm present. I'm right here." She's like, "Wow, your sage brain's like that exercise you're doing is like really working." But it's almost like you're, I call it the Jedi. You can stay in that place and your decision making becomes more optimal. So as an entrepreneur, I appreciate that component of it as well. But really more just my overall like health and well-being is better.
That was Jodi Scott, a health psychologist and the CEO of Sierra Sage Herbs, who own the iconic brand Green Goo, which is natural first aid remedies. And I've brought Jodi on the show, the Me and My Health Up podcast, to enlighten you about mental health and sleep. Yes, you're on the Me and My Health Up podcast, and I'm your host, Anthony Hartcher, a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. The purpose of this podcast is to enhance and enlighten your well-being. And today, Jodi's going to be doing that with all her knowledge around health, wellness, herbs, and everything natural. So without much further ado, I'd love to welcome you into the discussion I'm having with Jodi Scott. Welcome on the Me and My Health Up podcast. How are you, Jodi?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Fantastic. It's a really hot day here in Sydney, so feeling the heat.
There you go. Well, it's a cold day in Colorado, so maybe I need to pop over to Sydney and warm up a little.
Yeah, we're at two poles or two opposite ends of the world, right?
You can come here and cold plunge.
Yeah, you can come here and do the heat.
There you go.
Yeah, yes.
Perfect.
So great to have you on, Jodi. I'd love you to share with the listeners how you've arrived at what you're doing today.
Thank you. So yes, it's been quite the journey. I was pre-med, got my master's in health psychology, and I was training resident physicians on the biopsychosocial model, which is when I really became passionate about disrupting medicine and looking at it from a more holistic mind-body approach. And then my sister is an herbalist and a midwife and an Ayurvedic practitioner. And she was learning the practice of making topical therapeutics from plants, making these wonderful medicinal salves and balms. And my mom's kind of a self-taught computer programmer, website developer. And, the three of us got together and we were just sharing our observations of, wanting to be a part of the natural movement and how important it was to us. And one of the observations we made in our own home was that, here we were making really healthy choices, generally speaking. But when we opened up our first aid cabinet, that was the exception. Like, open up your first aid cabinet and here's all the chemicals. And I thought, my daughter was a year old and I was really starting to think, like, is there a natural antiseptic or a natural hydrocortisone? And then in that journey, I started studying just the space in general, and I found we weren't alone. The natural consumer was willing to abandon their natural ethos because they were told things like Neosporin, hydrocortisone, calamine, these typical chemical-laden first aid products were the only ones that could get the job done. And then the conventional consumer is like, I don't really care what the ingredients are. I just want something that works better. And here we're seeing like exponential rates of chronic skin conditions, and everything that's over the counter is for acute skin conditions. Use for 5 days. If symptoms don't discontinue, you will have kidney failure and go to your doctor. We thought, can we make plant-based alternatives that are superior in efficacy, are more sustainable, and, bring a little bit of personality and fun and plant-based to the space? And so Green Goo was born.
Fantastic. What an amazing backstory in terms of your journey and combining it with your sister's expertise. You've been able to work together and build an incredible company that's providing natural first aid products. So Let's talk a little bit about the mental health side of things, given that combination of your two experience, the psychology and also the herbs. I'd love to hear about how we can utilize herbs to improve our mental health, and particularly around anxiety and depression, given that they're probably at the leading forefront of what people mostly generally experience in their lifetime.
Yeah, obviously anxiety and depression are incredibly prevalent in our society for a number of reasons. And I think what I've really enjoyed in terms of sort of this full circle with us in herbs is the fact that first I started studying herbs for skincare, and then I started learning about the relationship of skincare and mindfulness. Then I started learning more about the herbs that impact mindfulness and how from this holistic perspective, we can impact our overall health and wellness. And there's, again, what kind of started this journey around 2016, 17 is when behavioral medicine scientists started reaching out to dermatologists and saying, is there a relationship between your mindfulness and can we impact our skincare? And so that's when my full circle started. And we started looking at, even in our own products, could we put in herbs that help from a holistic perspective? So you talk about, okay, what herbs are important for, mental health? Well, some of our favorites are like holy basil and ashwagandha. Looking at herbs as having adaptogens and having properties that may calm the system. And believe it or not, we actually put this in our deodorant. So we found that, certain areas of your body have higher absorption rate. So we're like, well, if we have so much anxiety and depression in our world and, we're making topical therapeutics, how could we potentially serve our customers more looking at this from a holistic perspective? And your armpit absorbs like 70% of what you put in there. So it's not just about what you shouldn't put under your armpit, but it's what you can put in from a nutritive standpoint. So we started studying the adaptogens and different herbs that work. And so we found like two of our favorites are going to be holy basil and ashwagandha. And we put that into the deodorant. Now there's other things you can incorporate into, calming the nervous system and things that have like GABA components to them. And quite honestly, lavender. Lavender and rosemary are wonderful relaxers. Calendula flower, that's another one. It has antiseptic, antifungal, antimicrobial properties, but it also has, medicinal properties that help sort of calm the mind. And I tend to take a very holistic approach to not only our skincare, but our health and wellness. We have an acronym that we use in our home and we call it SHAMAN. And so S is sleep, H is hydration, A is antioxidants, M is mindfulness, A again is avoid chemicals, avoid alcohol, avoid, parabens and phthalates. Phthalates are an endocrine disruptor, which impacts our mental health. So thinking about not just what herbs to have, but what things to avoid. Phthalates are the number one chemical being produced in the world. The U.S. produces 1 billion pounds a year, a year. And then these are endocrine disruptors that mess with your hormones, which then, disrupt your mood. And then nutrition. So we tend to look at, mental health and skincare in this very much holistic realm because you can impact your body. And it's not just about the herbs that you can have, but it's also the things that you can avoid. And hemp is another great one. I think, often it gets discounted because it's, looks like looks like the marijuana plant. But CBD that comes from hemp, and now mind you, CBD is in a lot of naturally occurs in a lot of ingredients. But the hemp plant itself is pretty fantastic for providing a nice volume of CBD that can then improve or balance your endocannabinoid system, which kind of creates homeostasis. And then you can bring things like holy basil, ashwagandha, calendula, lavender that help calm, and it makes that even like that much more productive.
And you mentioned before just the GABA in terms of making sure products, contain GABA, and GABA's that calming for the mind. It provides that, I guess, that non-excitatory stimulus to the mind. That's really that inhibitory sort of activity to the mind that provides that sort of alcohol sort of effect in terms of that calming. What products do you recommend in terms of where can people find GABA?
Honestly, I take GABA and I take straight GABA. And there's a number of different companies that provide, a version of that. A great time to take that is at the end of the day. So, as you're starting to unwind for the evening, you can take your GABA as a supplement. It's a great time to take holy basil as a supplement as well. That's also a great time for the hemp plant that can come in. Mugwort's another great one. It's one of my new favorites. That's one you want to have at the end of the day. And what's really fun is to infuse honey with mugwort, and you can put valerian root. That's another great one. And then make a nice little hot, like boil some water, put some lemon in there, and then if you've infused your oil, or excuse me, I'm thinking body care oil, but if you infuse your honey with some of these herbs and then you make this lovely little night tea, you will sleep wonderfully, get really great dreams, and wake up nice and refreshed. And you just find that it helps balance sort of the anxiety and depression relationship, because sometimes when you get, what we find, from a serotonin receptor standpoint, how those two work together. And, another trick that has nothing to do with herbs, that's highly recommended is when you wake up, look at the horizon and really look at it as the sun is coming up, and do the same thing at the end of the day before you go to bed. And there's a lot of science behind how that light comes in through your eyes and how it impacts, the different receptors in your brain to help balance out anxiety. And I'll tell you, today, I knew better not to look at my phone first thing. And I did. And I started off on the wrong foot today. It was that day. Put those phones away and don't let that be the first light that you get in your eyes, because you will feel the difference when you look at that horizon. It's pretty great.
Yeah, it's really working with that circadian biology, isn't it? As opposed to, exposing your eyes to blue light, which typically they wouldn't see predominantly until the middle of the day. And so you can imagine for the body, it's sort of, sort of waking up, and then it gets hit with blue light and thinking, oh, just, do I need to be in the middle of the day? Or I guess that getting that sunrise at the start of the day enables the body to wake up in a response that's more steady as opposed to
It is.
yeah.
It slowly invites you into the day. And I think, everything that we're doing on a regular basis is like, heck, marketing, news, work, it is all feeding off of our survive brain. And so then it just continues to produce all of the cortisol and, adrenaline that then puts us in that fight or flight. And it's wonderful that we have this fight or flight system, because it obviously has served us well in terms of avoiding danger, but it is overexploited throughout the day with the things that we're exposed to. And so I think that's one of my love and passion for plants, is it kind of brings you back to nature, which we know nature obviously has a positive impact on our well-being. And for whatever reason, it also draws you back to nature. So then you're like, hey, maybe I should go outside. Maybe I should slow down. Maybe I shouldn't, multitask and have a moment of being really mindful. And we call that the sage brain here. We're always like, and with my family, I'm like, let's continue to cultivate the sage brain, because what you find is it kind of sets the tone for your Jedi, as you will. And that when you're getting this influx of all this survive stuff, you can stay centered. And that's very difficult. Combine that with herbs and some mindfulness. It's a great combo. And something else I meant to mention, magnesium. Magnesium's another great one for calming the nervous system. And you can take the magnesium orally, and and there's some great combinations with like ashwagandha and magnesium are a great combo. And then there's also like topical sprays that I recommend as well. So those are some good alternatives.
That holy basil sort of going into the evening, you mentioned that was a great way to sort of, unwind and get in. So that holy basil you mentioned is a strong adaptogen. So it helps the body to adapt to the stressors and to, I guess, modulate and be able to start to better manage the stresses.
Yes, and holy basil was a surprise to me when I first discovered it in terms of how effective it is. I've always enjoyed kava, valerian root, lavender. Those are some of the more, common calmers. But holy basil just based on, its molecular structure and how it interacts with the body. I mean, it's kind of like a natural Xanax without all the side effects. And it works well with your blood pressure. So it can help, bring your blood pressure down. And there's lots of like nutritive properties to it as well. And there's food, there's certain foods that I also recommend just in terms of calming, which is interesting, like citrus, has some great, and it goes back to like my acronym that I was sharing, in terms of shaman. Antioxidants are calming to the body. It helps maintain homeostasis and it helps reduce cortisol. It helps reduce stress. And so, anytime you can reduce the cortisol yourself after getting influx with it, you're almost like armored up.
Yeah. So essentially acknowledging that you're uptight, aroused, and then looking for ways to, I guess, calm yourself and better deal with the stressors that you're faced with. And some of these techniques, such as you shared, can really help just bring yourself down into that more calming state and better receptive state to be able to think more rationally and work through the problems as opposed to reacting irrationally.
And being present, that's something that I've had to learn to work really hard at. As an entrepreneur, you're always, what's the next thing I need to tackle? What's the next thing I need to do? And you're always fast forward. And you'll find that being present not only will serve you for your own mental health, but it also brings you to a more centered state where you can, to your point, make better decisions and realize what to do. But it's not easy to stay in the present when we're constantly being signaled, right? And so that's where those little exercises, whether it's a handful of deep breaths or, rub your fingers. There's a reason why, you would see people in meditation rubbing those fingers together, because it brings you to your center, gets you grounded, gets you present. One of the exercises that I had a coach he would have me do, he's like, okay, I want you to focus on the sound that is the furthest away from you. And every time your mind wants to think of something else, you can only focus on the sound that is as far away. And then, so you do that for like a minute and your mind wants to wander and you just focus. And now he's like, okay, now switch to the sound that's closest to you. And every time your mind wants to wander, you bring it closest and you do that for another minute. And then eventually you hear your breath. And that was just 2-minute exercise. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have superpowers now. I'm good. It's pretty great. And now it gets taken from you pretty fast, but, do that frequently. He's like, okay, I want you to do that every 3 hours for 2 weeks, report back. And you feel a difference. It's pretty great.
Yeah, wow. So that's really engaging your hearing and essentially just tuning into that, becoming very mindful of your hearing in terms of, focusing on that most distant sound. And then once you've tuned into that, then bringing your, I guess, attention to the most closest sounds. Yeah, so essentially you're just really focused on that sensory around the hearing. And do you have your eyes shut when you're doing this? So you shut out
You do.
Yeah.
Yep,
So
eyes closed. Good.
and just engaging your hearing.
And it is, and it's interesting, I think that rewiring too, because they say for, every bad habit or bad thought, you have to come back with 10 more positive thoughts to have your mindset shift. And so I think that's one of the things too that I love about the relationships of herbs and these mindful practices is that it helps facilitate you to become more present in the moment so that you can continue to kind of rewire your brain to this place of presence, the sage brain, the optimism, and that's kind of my hope too for the psychedelic market is that, we're seeing the positive impact on neuroplasticity and the ability for the brain to learn, we'll call it new tricks faster. And if there's a way for us to perhaps, rewire in a more productive time frame to get to a place of a more settled mindset, it would be really great for humanity.
Absolutely. Yes. I'd like to touch on psychedelics, but before we go there, you've mentioned the sage brain a couple of times. Can you just go through the sage brain?
Sure. We like to call it the sage brain. So that's getting out of survive mode and getting into thrive mode. And it's a very intentional practice of developing those parts of your brain. So one of those being sort of the auditory exercise. And again, using that shaman acronym so that you're getting your body in a healthy state to be able to receive and practice these exercises so that your default isn't to go into the survive mode. It is, okay, fine. I'm going to be inundated with anxiety. I'm going to be inundated with stress coming at me. But how am I going to meet this? And can I default to my sage brain instead of my survive brain? And so that's what those exercises do. And I'll tell you, like, I went through kind of a 9-month sage brain training where every 3 hours I had to do these 2-minute exercises every single day. And much like working out your body, I was working out my brain. And lo and behold, it works. Like, I am the multitasker of all. My attention, like, my mom is great. She'll like walk me through directions on, heaven forbid, having to read a manual to like build something. And I just gloss over. And so it wasn't too long ago where she was like walking through some instructions with me, and she's like, "You're still with me?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm present. I'm right here." She's like, "Wow, your sage brain's like that exercise you're doing is like really working." But it's almost like I call it the Jedi. You can stay in that place and your decision making becomes more optimal. So as an entrepreneur, I appreciate that component of it as well. But really more just my overall like health and well-being is better. And you make better, like, you're like, I want to go outside because there's this exercise I need to do, and I'm going to, for my mind to build my sage brain and get outside. And so I shared with you the auditory one. There's a visual one where you look at the thing that's furthest from you and you look at all of the detail. And again, every time your mind wants to wander, you focus on that detail and you really look at, like, we'll call it, let's say it's the clouds you're looking at. Look at the clouds, look at the shape, look at the color, focus on that, and no thoughts coming in. And then the same thing, you come in and you do your vision as close as possible. And so when you play with that, with your different senses, you can then start to really build different parts of your sage brain that will serve you in just your normal existence.
And does SAGE stand for anything? Is it an acronym? Where does it come from?
It isn't.
Where's the origin?
I think it's become a term in this notion of getting out of survive mode. It's funny. I Googled it the other day to see if, there is is Wikipedia going to now define sage brain? And you don't find that. But what you do find is some great authors that talk about the sage brain, and they talk about emotional intelligence and how to, spend more time on emotional intelligence that are kind of attributes of, we'll call it the sage brain. So perhaps maybe one day it'll be a term that's like, heck, we're teaching it in our school system. Wouldn't that be great?
How do you spell it? What's the spelling of it? I'm not quite clear.
SAGE.
Oh, so it's
like the herb, just like the herb sage.
Okay. Because that's what I thought you were saying, and that's what I was, picturing the word as sage, and I thought, okay, it's an acronym. S stands for something, A stands for something, G stands, but that's not the case. So I haven't come across sage brain. So interesting. I learned something new on every podcast, and you've got me curious about wanting to find out more about this sage brain. And thank you for sharing those visual and auditory techniques that can really help get you out of the survival into the sage brain, which is where your Jedi is. That's where your flow state is. So that's really amazing. And you touched on the psychedelics before, and you're into this space. So in particular, which psychedelics are you putting into your formulas? And talk a little bit about the, I guess, mechanisms of action and what sort of indications indicate particular psychedelics.
Yeah, so we actually have a clinical trial that's happening in Nova Scotia called Hallucinex Life Sciences. And it is a clinical trial using micro and macro dosing of psilocybin for treatment-resistant PTSD in our vets and servicemen and women, police officers, and so forth. And so this clinical trial is really looking at how we can specifically treat and help with the treatment-resistant PTSD. But what's more fascinating is how this alternative modality is impacting these people's lives in a more holistic way. So we're seeing an 80% remission rate in a very short period of time. And so, putting my psychology hat on, you don't see remission rates like that, let alone in a short period of time, which is incredible. I mean, this population, I grew up in the military, so it's a population that I'm incredibly passionate about. And, we've been around people suffering from PTSD since I was little, and, my dad coming back from deployments and what that integration looked like. And so to see people who were suffering for a decade or longer find in a matter of months, a new perspective on life is profound. But even more so when they come, they're suicidal, they have anxiety, they have depression, but they also are overweight, or they're alcoholics, or they're self-medicating with, too many drugs or cannabis, or they have no friends, no hobbies. And they all of a sudden, are losing weight and eating healthy and getting rid of alcohol and going to concerts and reading books, like, couldn't read a book. I mean, it is absolutely beautiful to witness the impact of the psilocybin. So, what we'll do with that, I don't know yet, but what's exciting is getting the data. And I think, the opportunities are endless, whether it is, in very specific populations or, we're seeing just anecdotal research and results on folks that how microdosing psilocybin is impacting their overall, happiness. So I think it's early in this area, but you're seeing some massive breakthroughs, in Colorado being one of the first states to decriminalize it. And we have physicians that are studying to be able to offer these treatments by 2025. And heck, Australia was the first country to, take that position. And so I'm excited to see what happens in Australia with these beautiful alternative modalities.
And when you mention microdosing, what sort of, are you aware of the dosaging they're actually using in the study?
I am not. I wouldn't be able to speak to what the amount is that they're dosing. What I am learning as I've been studying other clinical trials and so forth is they're not apples to apples. So it's going to be interesting to see when these products become available for consumers, how they kind of regulate and normalize, not normalize, but regulate and make those doses consistent. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. But we do, at least from a micro versus a macro, you're talking 3 times the amount when you're looking at the difference between the two.
Okay, that would be really interesting space. I had a US student that recently joined my company, interning from the States, and they researched psilocybin, and they were really happy that Australia was sort of leading the way in terms of that. And so they were looking into the research. So yeah, it's certainly an emerging space, and really one that we've seen, I guess, through the breakthrough that we've had with medicinal cannabis and the benefits of CBD and the impacts in multi areas, like for many indications, CBD is applied. So hopefully that psilocybin is also going to make a big difference in, as you said, the PTSD area, and that's going to really help.
It is, and it's changing and challenging sort of our traditional medical methodologies. For example, they're seeing incredible results with phantom limb, late stage cancer and pain, and how they can manage the pain loop. So it's going to be really fascinating to see how it also will impact that. I mean, we talked about serotonin earlier, and we're learning gut health. That's something we didn't talk about earlier, but gut health and mental health are very much connected. And some of the research we're identifying in psychedelics is, oh my goodness, we have more serotonin receptors in our gut than we ever knew, And so I think we're going to see a new kind of medicine as a result of the research that's coming out of the psychedelic space. And I'm excited to see how that evolves.
And what other spaces are you watching, given your background and I guess the involvement with your sister around her Ayurvedic sort of space and herb space? Where do you see this natural medicine space evolving to, given that, you set out to create natural medicines that could be applied as first aid so that people didn't have to bring in all these additional chemicals in the first aid instance? Where do you see it going? You've mentioned psilocybin around helping PTSD, medicinal cannabis for, for various mental health, pain, all those sort of things. Where do you see this space going?
When we started this 10 years ago and we talked about making plant-based alternatives, people were like, what? What is this? There's no way. And I think the plant renaissance is here, which is really exciting. People talk about plant-based now, and I feel like it's a term that the consumer understands and resonates with. And it's turning into plant-based packaging. Like our toothpaste is a plant-based toothpaste with a plant-based plastic alternative. And so I think we're going to see this, kind of persevere through not only medicine, but how we consume products and personal care products, but then also the materials at which we use them, and climate change and environmental sensitivities and even impact, looking at business and impact. And so, I think we're at the tip of the iceberg, but we're also at a place where we're ready for it. The world is ready for plant-based, where 10 years ago they weren't. So I'm excited to see the innovation that's going to come from this, and then the data that's going to come from it as we continue to evolve as species. So it's an exciting time. It's pretty great to be a part of it, and I'm just loving it.
Yeah, and I certainly see it from the consumer point of view, that they're more aware. Like, they see these studies coming out about microplastics and thinking, if I'm consuming fish, I've got, I'm consuming also all these microplastics, which, we obviously know that's not good for us. As an endocrine disruptor, and the impact it has on our hormonal communication within our body, and obviously the BCO-demic, and, it being a sort of, a bit of a hormonal, excessive calorie consumption picture story. So it's wonderful that you've been able to address this whole topic around mental health in a very holistic way. I really appreciate that, because, initially we were just going to talk about herbs for mental health, and you've just brought in all this holism, which I love. And I really appreciate you showing how herbs can play a part in a much broader health sense. And it's been great that you've been able to share the space with everything else that can be done. So it's not just herbs, but you do it in conjunction with all these other things, such as the light, such as the hearing exercise, such as the in terms of what you can see, and all this sort of, this, I guess, stage brain ability. So I really appreciate it. And how can the listeners best connect with you and the great products your company manufacture and all these natural therapies?
Thank you. And by the way, I just want to say thank you for being so excited to be a part of that holistic experience, because it's just such a passion for me, and I feel like it's my duty to walk the talk for the customers and really embody what we're doing with these products. So thank you for highlighting that. And greengoo.com, that's the best place. Amazon as well. But greengoo.com is where you can find, all of the products and learn more about us. And of course, never hesitate to reach out. I'm always excited to talk to our customers. And some of them even become, great friends, and they check in. And that is really, that's what gets me up every day and excited to do what we're doing.
That's fantastic. It's fantastic. You're making a real impression in this plant-based movement, which is so important. And you're addressing all concerns around sustainability and packaging, which is really important, because at the end of the day, all this packaging finds its way inside of us, which we don't want. So
truly,
it's so great that you're addressing that in a more natural way. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Jodi, for coming on and sharing your insights.
It was great to spend time with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand me&my Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. Me&my Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you made to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information. To the maximum extent permitted by the law, me&my Health Up disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of me&my Health Up.